Well, hello, and welcome back to Containers from the Couch. My name is Jimmy Ray. Today with me is Justin Garrison. Say hello.
Hey, how's it going?
And we've got Darren Adams from Weaveworks today to talk to us about trusted delivery. Welcome, Darren.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I was promised a couch. Are there no couches?
You're on it right now. What do you mean?
Yeah, you're sitting on it. What are you talking about? Okay, so
how are you guys doing?
Oh yeah, we're good. Today we're going to be talking about just trusted delivery. So I guess we go ahead and get started. Let's hear what you have to say about trusted delivery. What are you going to show us today?
Well, I'm going to show a couple of different things. I work for Weaveworks, so we're the GitOps company. We have a product called Weave GitOps Enterprise. So that's our commercial software offering. But we come from a big open source contributor. So we use a lot of open source tools ourselves. But our founder, Alexis Richardson, came up with the GitOps term. He actually invented it, wrote a blog post about it many years ago now, and it's kind of developed into a whole thing. We were typically known as strictly a continuous delivery company, right, for our Flex agent. And what we've done over the last few years is really develop GitOps as the best way to operate your Kubernetes environment as a whole. All the way from infrastructure deployment to application delivery, and then maintenance of that in an ongoing way. The trusted delivery piece came around last year. I actually got dragged in to do a demo of our product for a company called Magalix, which does policy as code. And there were kind of some interesting discussions we had about how that fits into the GitOps world. And honestly, back then I was kind of like, I think this is too much for most people, right? Like, we're all struggling with just Kubernetes. You're in that world every day, right, Jimmy?
Like, oh yeah. I mean,
customers.
Part of my jam is policy as code as well, and so I talk to a lot of customers about that as well for Kubernetes.
Yeah. So I sort of figured that was kind of advanced Kubernetes, right? If you're having a hard time just getting the networking going, how are you going to get to a policy as code type of thing? But it turns out it's a really good fit for us, because delivering applications and infrastructure in a GitOps way is great, but there's a lot of compliance and best practices type of things that you could set up as guardrails around that entire lifecycle process. And that's where Magalix came in. They are a policy engine that runs on your cluster. And we actually ended up acquiring them in January, and we've been working on integrating them into Weave GitOps Enterprise. And that's what I'm going to show you today is how we've kind of taken what was previously a SaaS offering, just running on the Kubernetes clusters, now transforming that into a GitOps way of doing trusted delivery, right, from start to finish. And that's more than just checking policies against your code, right? It's at every step of that. Because I have Git as that central repository, I'm now able to do a bunch of things with that policy control, right? I can enforce all kinds of things that are going to make my environment more reliable, more stable, and allow my developers and my platform teams to speed up their deployments.
Yeah, so you're starting with your single source of truth and Git, and then it kind of like dovetails into what's really on fire right now with respect to the whole software supply chain security movement that's out there. So I think it's just in time, and it makes a lot of sense. And then the policy engine that you all are using, that's under the covers, that's Open Policy Agent, right? With Rego as well.
It's running OPA. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it's Rego. So of course, completely extensible. You can write your own policies. You can modify. We ship about 160 different policies, covering a variety of compliance aspects.
Can you give some
regulatory
examples?
compliance. Yeah, like so GDPR, HIPAA, SOX 2, PCI DSS,
Very nice.
those kinds of regulatory compliance. But then we also do a lot with what we call Kubernetes guardrails. So best practices that we've learned as we've worked as consultants in the field, of how best to operate your Kubernetes environment. And it's
Yeah, I
things like
really.
not running a container as root, right? Like
Oh
that's a
yeah.
simple one, but if you allow a developer to go do that, they're going to do that because it's easier for them.
Yeah, I really like the term guardrail. I mean, I use it all the time, explaining about policies as well. And the way that I look at it is, it's not just about restricting what they can do, but also guiding where they can go. And so over
Yep.
time, they actually will learn what they can do and what they can't do. And it's actually a freeing experience. I mean, I think at first it becomes a little heavy handed, but they get used to it. Everyone
Yeah.
gets used to it, and let's face it, you giving them instructions on how to use your Kubernetes cluster is not going to work without a set of guardrails.
Right.
So.
Right. And I do warn that. I warn customers that if you're installing it on day one and you suddenly lock down everything that the developers have been able to do for the last couple of years, they are not going to be very happy with you. So we kind of recommend easing into it, right? Put in the things that are important to you or important to your security team first. And then maybe, only require that in a UAT or staging environment, right? Leave your dev environments wide open at first so that you can continue to develop, but start protecting those production environments and get stricter and stricter as you roll into production. So
Okay.
that's that whole trusted delivery piece is, not just developing code, right? And not just deploying it somewhere, but really working on that whole staging throughout your whole environment.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's take a look at it and see what trusted
Okay.
delivery is. And I'll go ahead. There we go.
Yeah. Oh, you got my screen up already. Thanks. So yeah, this is Weave GitOps Enterprise here. This is actually our multi-cluster control plane. This is our single pane of glass view into all of the clusters running within your environment. Obviously, we have EKS cluster support through CAPI is a really strong thing that we do here at Weave. The way we create a new cluster is through what we call templates. And templates are, going back to kind of that guardrail analogy, it's a way of simplifying the cluster creation process in a controlled manner. So these are configured by you. We provide some examples, but they're designed to be customized for your environment. And these are all Kubernetes custom resources. So they're subject to all of your standard Kubernetes RBAC. So I'm in here as an administrator. I could be like a platform administrator. I'm able to create clusters anywhere I want. I might create a set of clusters and a view for a developer that is perhaps limited to a single region, right? It's a single AWS region. If I want to keep everything, domestic, or if I'm subject to policies in Germany or something like that, I could lock them into the EU regions. I can also limit the number of nodes that they're able to create. So sort of enabling a quick and easy way for developers to do things compliant, right, with what my policies are. So this template, I went for an EKS template here, and this is just kind of an example of what I was talking about, picking the region, Darren's best cluster, give it a human readable name,
And can
pick a
you
Kubernetes version.
can you actually control what users can see in these templates? I mean, from what they can pick.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. As soon as I run through this one, I'll show you an example of where we've locked it down a little bit. But in this case, it's free form fields, right? I've got drop downs available to me, and I can free form how many worker nodes I want on this ginormous cluster here. We're going to go 50 worker nodes. And then we come down to profiles, and profiles are another slick thing we do in this trusted delivery arena. These are essentially Helm charts and manifests that we wrap up in this easy checkbox method to install infrastructure components and applications on my cluster at bootstrap time. And again, these are all freeform. In the other example, I'll show you, we're enforcing that every cluster has, say, the Prometheus Grafana stack for observability. The Weave policy agent we want running on this. We need ingress, we want Flagger for progressive delivery, and we need a cert manager. If there are multiple versions here, I can pick here from my repo of what if I have them available. Again, if I want to lock this down from a compliance standpoint, I can say that I only want my certified version, that my security teams have approved, right? I don't want to be running 009. I only want to be 008 because that's my corporate standard.
Do you keep a compatibility matrix?
We do, yeah, and we actually provide support for these. So these profiles are curated by us, and you can also add your own. But we not only provide support for installing a bunch of applications, but in the commercial software support, we actually do provide, actual first call type support on a lot of the common Kubernetes applications, like these ones you see.
Right, yeah, that's always a big concern, especially if like I'm upgrading a cluster or something. I need to know which plugins are supported still, which ones need to be upgraded, if there's config changes.
Absolutely.
I remember like Core DNS had always had config map problems where it's like, oh, this is going away. You're upgrading this version of Kubernetes supports this version of CoreOS, and you need this config map. And then you just have this huge matrix of 50 different components.
Yeah.
Just bundle the thing for me, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't think we have that level of complexity, but yeah, certainly the stuff we ship we know works. And we also
like
do
cohort,
what we call.
I mean, I was just saying, it's almost like a cohort. You can choose certain things, and this is the footprint of this particular cluster. And I may go to a different cluster, and now I've got different versions of different software based on what I'm going to do. You can control in this interface. You can control what you want for that cluster, but you up behind the scenes can control what they are allowed to choose as well. So that's very nice.
What they're allowed to. Yeah, that's exactly why we do it, right? Because we want to make sure that every cluster we're deploying is consistent, right? Because adding complexity and giving flexibility leads to those issues that you're talking about, right? With the incompatibilities. So yeah, being able to lock that down is critically important. Unless you're a platform guy, right? Like if you want to come in as a platform person and put things on and not put things on, well, okay, maybe that's a right we're willing to give you. Maybe not. So then that's basically it for creating a cluster. But because we're GitOps, we're not going to create that cluster right here and now. What we're actually going to do is create a pull request within my Git repository. So in this case, I'm just going to do a quick authentication with GitHub. And we'll see if it wants my two-factor. No, we're good. So I'm going to authorize Weaveworks. Oh, there, I knew it was going to ask for that. This is why I've got my phone here. Nobody look at my screen for a second, okay? Now you're good. I'm just joking with you. GitHub. It'll expire in a second anyway. I assume that's not a security risk, right? Two-factor authentication code goes away. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jimmy. You're the security guy.
I don't know how long it persists. I thought it was like a one-time thing. So
yeah,
right.
I think you're right. Okay, so my credentials have been detected. So now I can create that pull request. And pray to the demo gods, because this is my life. It's going to sit there for a second, and then it's going to successfully create that PR. And this is a nice link. I can click straight through and see that cluster creation PR was created. Now, this is your standard Git, right? So whatever your standard Git approval process is, we're going to adhere to that. And again, you could kind of customize some workflow in here, like we were talking about, not protecting the dev environments as much, right? We might automatically allow those developers to create clusters in a dev region, right? Or in a dev,
the wild west
realm. Yeah, exactly. Right. So they can keep doing their work as quickly as possible. But when I'm rolling into production and maybe there's a financial component involved in that, I might have some additional approvers in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think
So really,
what we're talking about here is that the attestations for delivering things to these environments change as the environments increase, right? So what you may want some type of other attestation to get it into staging, and maybe you want a manual attestation to get it in production. It's up to you. But I mean, in dev, right, the attestations are generally a whole lot less.
yeah, I don't know what that word means, but I'm sure you're right.
The gates, the proof you need to allow
Yeah,
something to happen. Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. No, that you're spot on. Um, or if you're in a highly regulated environment, like we have a lot of customers who are large banks, they are not going to do anything without approval, right? It's going to slow them down. They're not going to be at cloud native speed, but it's going to be secure and logged,
Yeah,
and that's
but
the whole point of a trusted delivery.
may not be at cloud native speed, but they are at audit speed, and so they have to
Correct.
respond to their
Yes.
audit. Yeah.
Yes. So as a reviewer, I would come in here and I would, just check out what files were changed here. In this case, you can see these are the customizations and those profiles that we installed. So this is all standard YAML. You can edit this if you have rights, resubmit that for approval. And then as we come down to this third file here, you get the actual YAML that creates that cluster using CAPI, that cluster API that I mentioned earlier. So the Amazon version of this is Kappa, which actually Weaveworks, we wrote EKS Cuddle. So we actually working with the Amazon engineering folks on keeping feature parity with the Kappa provider. So everything you can do in EKS Cuddle, you should be able to do in CAPI. So again, what that template was a really simplified version of this. So as an application developer, I don't need to know all these 75 lines of code to create that cluster. I just used a simple template. I put in some simple information, and the Weave GitOps engine did that hard work underneath. That all makes sense?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so once I've approved that, I can just merge it, and then the Flex agent that's running on our management server is going to kick off that bootstrap, and it's going to create that cluster. EKS takes about 10 to 15 minutes to spin up. So I'm going to pull the old Julia Childs trick and show a cluster I created earlier.
So yeah,
And really,
with respect to that Flux agent that's running on your management server, so the management server is all about building out these other clusters. But when you build out these other clusters, can we assume at some point another Flux agent gets pushed into that cluster, or are you doing more of a
yep.
centralized update of that cluster as well?
No, that's exactly it. So there's a Flux agent running on each of what we call the leaf clusters. So these are all individual leaf clusters, and this is where I'm going to deploy my applications to. Right, the management cluster is responsible for managing connectivity to all of those and making sure that they're all running correctly and giving me this single pane of glass view. But your application deployments are actually going to happen on each of those individual clusters, and they're each using their own Flux agent to keep their applications, which should be running, their current state in sync with the desired state that's in your Git repo.
And at that level of tiering, you recommend having a management cluster for cluster maintenance, upgrades, components, centralized, and then the Flux agent running in each of the leaf clusters, as you mentioned. Those are going to be deploying applications, not managing the cluster themselves. Those leaf Flux agents are not for cluster maintenance components, right?
They can, yeah. If you're doing a whole cluster, upgrade, which you can do with CAPI, for lifecycle management, then that's going to go offline in the middle of that, right? That's a momentary outage on that. But no, that Flux agent is running continuously within that cluster.
Do you typically recommend mixing application and infrastructure deployments in the same Flux agent? I don't know if there's like boundaries on ownership or permissions or security. I know you can have multiple repos plugged into the same Flux agent, but I don't know about like mixing and matching the different types of like, do I want to have the same Flux agent that deploys my logging to also deploy my apps?
Yeah, it's up to you, right? We're super flexible in that kind of stuff. Flux has been around long enough that they've built in all those capabilities. Yeah, one Flux agent is totally fine for that. Where we see people doing multiple Flux agents is sometimes around tenancy. And we've actually made some recent improvements in that Flux agent to support multi-tenancy within a single Flux agent. But obviously, as that scales, if you've got hundreds of tenants with hundreds of applications running on hundreds of servers, that's where you start needing to add a little more oomph to it.
So I think one of the questions that I've had posed before was, if we were looking at other tools that do GitOps and everyone starts to put this GitOps, tool on their cluster, and then we realize that maybe there's a way of shrinking back from that and having, like you said, a management cluster that also not only builds clusters but also manages a GitOps for other clusters. Is from what I'm hearing, it's flexible. That model is for using this.
Yeah, you do need a Flux agent on each of the clusters, and with the trusted delivery piece, we're running the policy agent on there as well, right? So that's checking continuously within that cluster, and that's good if you're in an offline situation as well, right? We have a lot of clients that are like retail stores or even cruise ships we've seen, right, where they're running a Kubernetes system. Yeah, where they're completely air gapped. Government customers as well that are air gapped. So in that way, you want it reporting metrics back to the management server, but you want it to run completely independently. And the point of the Flux agent and where GitOps kind of deviates from infrastructure as code or application as code or X as code is that continuous reconciliation. So it's always checking your Git repo, and it's always making sure that you are as you defined it to be. And with the addition of the policy piece, not only are you ensuring that your application is running as it's supposed to be, you're doing it in a compliant manner. You're making sure that not only at code submission time, when I'm creating my application, but when it's actually running, it's still adhering to all of those policies that I've set.
So with trusted delivery, then we've built this cluster. We have installed the agents to allow this cluster to maintain its internal applications from the repos that the agent points to. We've also installed the policy agent in there as well, so we could actually see. Yeah. Can we see like it stopping things from happening? Violation, like I see violation log right there. Can we see that?
Yeah. Let's see. There's no violations. We have a perfectly clean demo environment. No, so
never happens.
This is the piece. Yeah, this was the piece
until developers get to it. You're good.
Yeah. So yeah, my applications are running. The policy agent is scanning. The Weave policy agent was previously a SaaS offering. So that's what this looks like here. This is my demo cluster running here. And these are all of the policy violations. These are the policies that I have running against that cluster. They have a category of what type of policy they are, whether they're one of those regulatory compliance things I talked about, and the severity, and then how many violations I have. We also do some reporting. We have this cluster violations I had here. This is a nice little report that I could send to my chief security officer, or I could worry about in the middle of the night, right? This is how many policy violations by category I have. I can also take this to my developers and say, look, you guys, we all agreed that these are the policies we're going to adhere to. This is how many policies we have found that you have violated. Please remediate. Right.
So let me get so when you say policy violations and you're asking them to remediate, so I assume that this can run in 2 different modes then at least? Like you can run it in like an audit mode where it scans and looks for violations, or you can run it in an enforcement mode, right?
Yeah, I was actually leading into a trick point here. The beauty of trusted delivery is that I don't put non-compliant code into production, right? That is the key, and that's the shifting left methodology, moving that responsibility over to the developers so that compliant code never gets into my production environment. The way we do that is a couple different ways. The first is in which repo is it? Oh, did I close that window? Give me 1 second. Weaveworks, it's going to be in. Can you pause my screen for 1 second, please, while I find out where I put that?
Gotcha.
GitOps pod info. Okay, there we go. Yeah, you can bring it back now. Okay. So what we've done here, this is our actual repo for a pod info deployment. So this is one of the applications that appears over here in my applications list. So it's pulled out of this Git repo. So that I just, where did I put this? Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay, sorry. I'm going to move that into the right place so I know what I'm talking about. What we've done in this Git repo, and this is GitHub, obviously. So what we've done is through the use of an action, we are calling that Weave policy agent on any time code is submitted through a PR. And what it does is it scans that newly submitted code against all of the policies I have enabled on that cluster. In this example here, my coworker Daryl decided that he wanted to reduce the replica count to 1, and that is not a Kubernetes best practice, right? So the guardrail here is the replica count must be greater than or equal to 2. We only found 1, so the policy agent actually stopped that PR, right? There is no way to proceed with this PR with the non-compliant code. The cool thing we can do with this, because we have the Rego piece, right, and we know it needs to be greater than 2, we detected 1. Actually, I'm going to go back and show you what that code actually looks like real quick. This is the run here. So you can see the code that actually got scanned and the policy that it actually violated, a reliability policy of medium, and from this reduce replica branch. What the Maglix policy agent is able to do, the Weave policy agent is able to do, because we know what the fix is, we can actually auto remediate that. So in this case, you can see a couple seconds later, the Weave policy agent actually created a compliant version of that code, that everything is green, everything's good to go, and Daryl's PR got pushed through into production. All is good. So that really shifts left, right?
And you can control if you want it to auto remediate or not.
You can, absolutely, yeah. And not all policies can, right? Some things are a little more difficult. Setting a security context, for example, right? We know that we're not going to allow you to run it as root, but we don't know what user you do want to run it as. You could define that in the policy if you knew, but yeah, we're not going to auto remediate something like that.
Now, what a policy stops something from getting merged. Does someone actually have the ability to override that, or can you control who is allowed to override it?
Yes and no. So if you've got policies on this repo, then no. Right? We have all agreed this is a policy that we are not going to allow you to do. You could if you had rights to the policy console, you could go in and remove that policy from that cluster, right? Or make it so it's just a warning instead of enforced. But you wouldn't do that in a production environment, right?
Well, I mean, I wonder. The only reason I bring it up is because if you're in a situation where you have to brute force something, um, how would you get around this if you had to? I'm not saying the business would ever want to do this, but
Yeah,
I have been in that situation before.
I know
So
what you're talking about. Middle of the night, your pager goes off, right? And you just need to get the application
yeah,
back up and running. But so not only is that bad policy decision, that's
absolutely.
actually bad GitOps methodology, right? So if you made a change directly to that cluster, if you had admin rights to do that, a kubectl apply something, the Flex agent is going to come in and say, no, what you have in Git is
Doesn't
this,
match.
right?
Yeah.
I see that you made this change. I'm going to roll that back, right? Good and bad. Right? So the
Yeah.
correct course of action is to develop the fix in dev, right? Or dev or test environment, prove that it works, right? You might have the policies enabled in your test environment to make sure they're compliant. Then I make the change to that prod branch and deploy it to the main branch and deploy that to my prod clusters through GitOps, right? So I'm going to make the change to the Git repo. I'm going to let the Flex agent reconcile that. Then I'm going to have my fix in production. That way it's audited. It's compliant with all of my policies that I have in there. And if my fix doesn't work, I can roll back that change in Git and have Flex handle rolling it back to as I was.
Okay. Point taken.
So you're bad. Don't do that.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
But so that's a change in mindset for a lot of people, right? Because you're used to being able to get into the clusters, especially the clusters you own, right? Like a dev cluster running somewhere, or you spin up a kind cluster locally, something like that, and you want to tinker with it. Okay, maybe that's fine, right? Maybe we're not going to have full policy enforcement on that. But at some point, if security is a concern to your organization, which it is for just about everybody these days, right? Then we have to agree that this is the best way to operate that.
So to be clear, is this like a defense in depth layering approach where I'm shifting left and I'm looking at what's getting ready to be applied and applying policies in my Git repo to make sure that these things don't merge that are outside the guardrails? But I also would be able to do the same type of controls using dynamic admission controllers inside the cluster itself.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a three-pronged approach to it. So that first is on code submission in Git. Second is running, we have a gatekeeper running inside the cluster that's checking the current running state. That's using the OPA piece, right? And then we have integration with the admission controller. So any new ingress, any new access is going to get scanned against those policies as well.
Cool.
And it's interesting to think about what can be by a policy. It's not necessarily just things running as root. It can be, every pod has to have a label on it. Every Docker image has to be signed, right? It has to have a stamp on it. It can be versions of stuff. I for an example of, like when log4j exploit came out, right? I can require a certain version of modules, right, or code, and I port on everything that's not compliant with that. I can require that everything has an SBOM, right?
So here's a use case. A lot of folks will run validating and mutating, webhooks inside their clusters. And let's say that I've got a use case where I'm mutating a lot of things that are inbound. Now, in so doing, I'm changing what the end result of that resource is from what it emitted from Git. So that's
right.
a GitOps violation right there, right?
Yeah, and we've had a lot of discussion about mutating policies and such. I don't have a good handle on that to give you a good answer, to be perfectly honest with you.
Because I see folks, I
Yeah,
mean, they'll use mutating webhooks for not just, hey, I'm missing these labels, or this was wrong and I want to change it, but some folks for like multi-tenancy, and be able to run their applications on namespace specific nodes and keep other, repel others from using those nodes. They'll use, taints and tolerations, and they'll use node affinities and labels.
yeah,
And both the node
right.
affinity and the tolerations are applied via mutation webhooks. So
Yep.
yeah.
It's a good point. So Rego is really flexible, right?
Yeah.
And we have a guy on staff who's the Rego expert, and unfortunately he gets all the calls whenever there's a Rego question.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of that, you just have to work with it, to find what works in your environment. And what everybody agrees on is an acceptable level of risk, right? And the best we can do to protect the environment.
I mean, in all fairness, you could take what is mutating inside the cluster itself and shift that left as well and have it mutated, in your policies, I guess, inside,
And
the
yeah,
Git repo. Yeah. So
right. And that brings me to a great point I wanted to share here. Is I talked about the SaaS option that we had with the Weave Policy Agent. The policies defined here, I'll show you an example. This is containers running in privileged mode. We have some really nice help text in here, which standards require this, including things like NIST 800-190 for those super Kubernetes security geeks. This gives a nice little help text of what the policy does, and then what it's specifically looking for, right? With a link to the Kubernetes documentation, explaining, in this case, security context. I have the ability to define some of those parameters, and then modify the policy here. What we've done since we acquired Magalix was moving that over into a GitOps way of doing that. So your perfect example, ignore the errors here. This is just saying I don't have policies on all of the clusters in my environment. But here's what I have running. So in this case, this container running as root, I have it within the Weave GitOps UI. It happens to look almost exactly the same. Here is the actual policy code that I'm checking against. So you can see that it's quite a complicated little policy. So it looks very similar, but the real genius of what our developers did is moving the repository for that into the Git repo. So this is my infrastructure repo for my demo 2 cluster, with demo policies running here. And here's my containers running as root YAML file. So exactly that use case you were saying, if I have a change to that, I have a secure and compliant way of doing that, by updating this policy within the Git repo, right? Instead of having it off in a separate SaaS thing. So this is a description of all that text and everything, and then the actual Rego code is in here to make any changes to. Again, with all the benefits of Git, right? Audited, logged, able to roll back, subject to approval, all of that we've been talking about.
okay.
Does that kind of help with your little use case there?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, as I said, our developers in no time at all have managed to move this over to the GitOps way of life. What's coming next is bringing over those dashboards and the reporting. Because everything we're doing here is at the Kubernetes level, it becomes a little more difficult to store that historic information. but obviously for policy and compliance, that's needed. So that's what we're working on right now is making that a little more robust from the reporting angle, which is a critical piece of that trusted delivery, the whole shebang, so to speak. Excuse me while I sip my iced coffee.
Oh yeah. So
my wife brought me some iced coffee yesterday when I had back-to-back meetings, and it was the greatest thing ever. So I brewed a whole bunch today.
Oh, okay. Okay. So with the trusted delivery approach that is underpinned by GitOps, and and a basically policy enabled GitOps is what it looks like to me.
Right.
Then you can take care of everything from commit to build, deploy, and
runtime.
Runtime, yeah.
Right. For everything, right? So my infrastructure is defined in Git. So, the structure of my clusters, where they are, what they're doing, how big they are, what components are running on them, that's in Git so we can enforce it. My application development is all handled within Git, so I can scan that at development time, at deployment time, at upgrade time. Every time you're touching Git, we have the ability to scan that against our policies.
And so the future involves increasing the visibility or the analytics portion of this to help people understand what's going on in their environments.
Yeah, that's one piece of it from the policy aspect. What I think our overall goal for Weave GitOps is to speed up the time it takes to do that. The infrastructure creation, the application deployment, and then maintenance of that, without having those policies get in the way of that, right? So helping to enable developers to spin up clusters in minutes and deploy applications to it right away, without having to think about all of the controls that my security teams might have. Really about improving the speed to all of that and eliminating a lot of the human error, right? So, and that's another piece where people think of policies as containers running as root. It doesn't have to be a best practice type of thing. It could be preventing somebody fat fingering something, right? Accidentally putting in the wrong user ID for my run as, right, for my security context. It could be something from a performance aspect, right? If you don't have auto scaling enabled, right, or you don't want them to be able to auto scale, that could be a policy as well, right? So I'm ensuring the health of my environment as well as keeping it, quote, secure. Really limitless possibilities.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way that policy engines work generally inside Kubernetes is as long as they can see the inbound API server request payload, whatever's in that request can be interpreted, however they want to match it to a policy and then evaluate it with the policy. Which brings me up to the next question then. Can your tool use data beyond that which is available in the request payload? Like in the original days of OPA, and I guess how it still works inside Kubernetes is, you've got the OPA agent, the service itself, and then you've got like its sidecar that does, you tell it what data from the cluster you want to throw into it. And now I guess OPA Gatekeeper actually has a new feature that allows you to go after external data. That you tell it where to find it. So is this something that you guys are looking at, or you already do, or?
Yeah, it's something we're looking at. I don't think we do it today. Anything we have access to, we want to be able to apply a policy to, right?
Mhm.
One of the new pieces we launched with Flux is a Terraform controller for the Flux agent to keep Terraform scripts in sync and manage them in a GitOps way. So in that kind of example, Terraform is being used for all kinds of things outside of Kubernetes, right? But if I've got them in my ecosystem, then yes, we can apply a policy against those. Actually reaching out beyond that, that's a whole new, whole new scary world, right?
Well, I mean, for instance, let's say one of the first use cases I always reuse this when I'm talking about the external data is like I'm bringing in an application that has a service and an ingress, and oh, by the way, I don't want that ingress to step on other ingresses in the same namespace or else with host names or whatever. And so that's one of the use cases for replicating existing Kubernetes cluster ingress resources into
Yep.
the policy agent as data, so that you have it there and you can use it to compare to inbound requests to create new ingresses.
Yep. I'm sure Tony could write you that.
So, I mean, it looks like, from what I can tell, it looks like you've got a ton of policies in your policy library, especially in your industry standard ones like your PCI DSS and your SOC 2 and your HIPAA.
Yeah, I actually have a whole slide of exactly what I've got.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I know we said no slides, but I don't have these numbers memorized. So yeah,
No, I get it.
I came from the healthcare world, so yeah, I've dealt with HIPAA since it first came out. Kind of a nightmare, and then I've been in California the last few years. I just moved to North Carolina, but dealing with the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy stuff, right, is a big issue. I know my German colleagues are dealing with GDPR all the time, right? So those are very important standards to hit. And then the NIST standards, they themselves are kind of a lot of Kubernetes best practice and good to have, nice to have type of things.
Well, I mean, a lot of
Definitely
times when
doing
you're
that.
building these policy, you're implementing these policy agents, a lot of times you're building out a set of controls for your environment that are coming from standards, and a lot of times these standards are not just in-house standards. They're they adopted PCI
Right.
because they're a financial institution, or SOC 2 as well.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, this is
Yeah,
very
and back to that speed of compliance thing, right? Like,
yeah.
the speed of audit you said earlier, right? That the
Yeah.
auditor's coming in and you say, well, they say, are you PCI DSS compliant? And you go, I don't know. I
Well,
kind of
here's the
think we are.
auditable
I
artifacts. Yeah.
haven't done anything. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, having this here, you just put that report of them, 22 clusters scanned, 0 violations found.
And it kind of
There
like
you go.
takes us into compliance as code, sort of, so to speak.
It really is, yeah. If that isn't trademarked. Hey,
I
I
don't
was
think it
watching
is.
some of your videos and you had a sign language translator on some of them. I was hoping we'd have one today because I wanted to see what the sign language was for X as code, right? Because we have all these acronyms, and I was amazed watching the lady sign all the different, even EKS and that stuff.
The sign language interpreters we usually get for our container days. So the longer streams that are
That's what I was
typically
watching.
like
Yeah.
bigger events. We'll
Yeah.
have interpreters on for that. X is code or something as code. Typically I took sign language in college. So it's just, you're just going to do the 2 signs of something code. Yeah. So it's not,
Okay.
there's no like filler words necessarily. But yeah, you'll just say like this, like, and then code. I don't know the sign for code, but they may just spell it out.
Yeah. And then what do they do for acronyms? They spell out each individual letter?
Spell them. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So they have to know
And
how
a lot of
many
times they
A's
can
are
even
in,
do like
in
if there is
HIPAA.
if there is a sign for that thing, and you can do like A, you would like for 2 A's, you just drag your hand. This is A. Actually, that's S A. Sorry, it's been a while. But yeah, you like you can keep going
That's
for
E,
like how
right?
many A's
I
you're
know
having, and So yeah, E, A, B, C, D, E, F,
Okay,
G,
so
H. I could do it, but I'm really slow. It's been a long time.
that's cool. Yeah. I love watching them. Have you seen the videos of them signing rap concerts?
Yeah.
It's super cool.
Yep.
If you haven't, I love it.
So we are
Okay, so
almost at the end here. So what do you want to leave our viewers with? I mean, wrap up trusted delivery.
yeah, I can leave you with the links slide. I think Justin, you might be able to post those somewhere, but if not,
and yeah,
yeah,
we
we have a demo. Oh, perfect. Yeah, so we have a demo of the trusted delivery start to finish by our technical marketing manager, Steve Waterworth, who has absolutely the greatest voice you will ever hear. So I highly recommend you watch that demo. It's only 7 minutes, and he's amazing. Like if you're ever in a bad mood, just listen to a Steve Waterworth demo, and you'll be like, the world is great. He's like the Bob Ross of Kubernetes presentations. Absolutely love him. And then this talk from Red Monk was really interesting. So that was about the guardrails that we've been talking about, right? Making sure that my Kubernetes environment is run in a best practices type of way. And then my coworker Leo did a great webinar on using AWS EKS and the various tools that you guys offer with that, including your ECR and all of your security policies. So that's about an hour talk on that with somebody from AWS as well. So that's a good. If you want to get in the weeds on the technical and security piece, I recommend you watch that.
Cool.
Oh, cool.
Just reading through the
thank you very
questions,
much.
seeing if there's anything. I think we covered it all.
No, we've been chatting as we go. So
excellent. Well, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate everybody tuning in to watch. It was a lot of fun. Got me out of my day-to-day back-to-back meetings.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Darren.
Talk to you later.